Today's video thumbnail features a custom figure from the legendary Juan Soto. Check out his link in the description below for all your custom figure, action figure needs. He's a lot more talented than I am, I'll tell you that. On with the show. I've worked on a lot of Masters of the Universe toys, but I've never worked on Masters of the Universe Origins. It's been released way after I left Mattel. I was the guy who worked on classics. But I have experience working on MOTU lines, and I get asked a lot of questions now that we're about a year into Origins is what's the future of this line? Well, we can definitely talk about the elephant in the room, and we can definitely talk about factors that indicate how well a line is doing and what the chances are that it's going to continue. And I'm happy to give my professional opinion, noting I don't work on the line. This is the line I did work on. But a lot of people have expectations that Origins is going to get as big as Classics and release every character in the vintage line. Well, let's see if we could peel back some layers and look at what clues and what factors at retail help indicate the strength of the line and whether or not we are going to get a line that's as big as Classics and we'll get every figure in Origins. Alright, so first off, shipping. Obviously, there have been shipping issues with this line, as there are every toy line that's coming out this year, and a big part of that is the issues happening at ports, but a lot of the specific issues with shipping with Origins, which I did cover in a previous video, but to recap, is it was launched at one major US retailer, that being Walmart, because Walmart is a very strong retailer that's big enough to have a big enough PO. And that meant that the only other retailers that could carry Origins for the first 6 months, 8 months, was the international market. And that's why you saw things like Wave 2 show up very strongly in international locations, but not in the US. Walmart likely placed their entire order for set against Wave 1, which was probably the only product available for set. So, because of that, they wound up with a huge amount of Wave 1, and by the time Wave 2 was available, it couldn't ship to the US because it was restricted. So that's why when it finally could ship to the US, well, the product had to go based on what figures would sell and based on MOQ. So if you can only have a certain order quantity, and let's say that only justifies a couple of figures, you're going to ship, ideally, if you're a toy company, the characters that are going to sell the best. And that's why you saw a lot of He-Man and Skeletor for the remainder of the year in the US, because ideally they should be the best-selling character to kids. And a good indicator of some of the shipping issues is also the Mattel Toy Store. Now, while it is open up to the public, there are limited locations, and you basically have to be in East Aurora, New York, or El Segundo, California to visit one. But if you're lucky enough to live in one of those areas or close to it, and you went in, you probably saw that there were a huge selection of Origin figures available. And that's because, again, because they were restricted, they being Mattel, to only shipping to Walmart for the first 6 to 8 months, they had inventory that needed to be disposed of, and that means the only place you can sell it in the US is in Mattel's own stores because of the retailer exclusivity window, and hence international winds up with a better selection than the US, and the only place in the US to get it is the Mattel store. And then, of course, there's the infamous Target 2-pack, the Rise of Evil pack that was supposed to bring down the entire toy industry and is now collecting dust. And that's a great reminder that as collectors, we have to have a little patience because it's going to take some time for inventory to catch up with demand. The entire quota is not going to ship on day one. It takes time. So it's just a good lesson to know that when something ships, you need to have a little patience. All right. So what about the future of the line, and how can we use what's at retail, what's selling now, what's been announced, as an indicator to understand the strength of a line? And this doesn't just apply to Origins, this applies to any toy line at retail, and these are good tricks to know. So, hey, write some of these down. Well, first off, there's the clearance factor. Is the product on clearance? If the answer is yes, that means that retailers are already scaling back. They may not put every SKU on clearance, but even if some SKUs in a line are on clearance, it means that the planogram is going away. So keep that in mind. The other factor is to think about the tooling to sales ratio. The higher sales, the more tooling you get. Tooling is a capital expense and a one-time sunk expense. So, looking at how big sales are is an indicator of how much tooling is allowed for the line. The more sales you get, the more tooling is sort of unlocked, the more tooling budget a line gets. I found this with every line I ever worked on. A good visual of this is the original Masters of the Universe line. When they launched in 1982, they launched with very limited tooling. There were basically three bucks, or body types: human, beastie, and furry, which was Stratos and Beastman. And then there was the female buck, of course. Later in the line, you saw almost every figure was a fully tooled figure with very little reuse. And that's because the line was selling in the millions of units. So the higher the sales, the more tooling. So looking at Origins, you can see that for the most part, they tend to have stuck to those original $3 and used, or rather released, the characters that can utilize these parts. This is something I'm very familiar with a Masters of the Universe line, because we had to balance this with classics very much, thinking about how many characters can we get out so we have variety, but we also are very mindful of the tooling budget, knowing that MOTU as a line is really based on shared parts. Now, obviously, there are some figures that get more new parts, and the fact that the figures are designed in a sort of plug-and-play, customizable way allows the parts to share more easily. So, yes, they are doing characters with more shared parts, but they're also being very clever in a good way of finding characters they can release with minimal new parts, hence the Lieutenant Spector figure they're doing. All right, so with tooling, anytime you can repaint or reissue an existing tool, it saves a huge amount of capital, because a tool is going to cost between $30,000 and $100,000. And yes, I'm a bit of an expert on this because Classics was all about balancing this out. A good example I like to use, and not a He-Man example, but a Marvel example, is this wave of Marvel Legends. You can see there's one fully tooled figure, Beast. All the other characters are basically heads and armor. Maybe an arm here and there, maybe a cape here and there, but for the most part, very little tooling compared to the Beast character. That's the blue guy in the top left, for those not Marvel fans, and he was fully tooled, meaning he was probably about $100,000 to tool. So looking at the upcoming waves that have been announced, and some have started to release, it's a good indicator of sales if you look at how much tooling is in the wave. And that's why it's important to sort of really look at this wave. As an example, the next two waves, a lot of repaints. I mean, you had Fisto getting a new head in Fist. Here you have, Webstore getting a new head and new armor for Stinkor. But otherwise, a lot of the upcoming waves for Origins are very heavy on repaints. Some of them are straight repaints, and a classic example of that is taking Teela and repainting her as Green Goddess, or Eternian Goddess, I believe is what they're calling her now. There's absolutely no tooling involved. It's literally what's called a repaint. And same tool, different color. And yes, we did this in Classics too. Of course we did. And sometimes the character will let you get away with this, in the content and in the way the toy line is designed. It's not a bad thing. I mean, we're not going to do zebra stripe Teela or, something like that. And Webster, obviously, getting some new parts, but he's still based on the human and reptile buck that was created for Skeletor and He-Man. Stinkor, same thing. He's using a lot of existing parts, just really getting new armor that eventually could get used for Mechanic too. So it's kind of an investment tool. Because remember, Stinkor is just Merman with new armor, same head. So minimal tooling in all of these upcoming waves. I mean, the less said about Faker being a repaint, the better, because he's basically a perpetual repaint figure. That is one of the reasons he winds up as mail away and convention items. So another factor to look at, though, is inventory. What bucks, what tools does Mattel have in their inventory that have not seen wide release and could be relied on to build a wave around in the future? So obviously something like the PowerCon exclusives is a good example, because you have quite a few new tools and some fully tooled items that have been introduced at PowerCon. Things like the Gray Skull armor. It's a fully tooled figure. At least I think he is. I don't think he has reused parts there. That's a lot of tooling. Same thing with the Horde Troopers. Grizzlor is an existing tool with soft goods, but still new head. All right, and then you have the Sorceress, who has been released in her Temple of Darkness, or White Movie, White New Adventures, however you want to think of it, deco, and has been an exclusive figure packed in with the Castle Grayskull playset. Now, this is actually a very wise choice, because there's sort of a marketing rule that you always want to kind of release the figure that's going to sell poorer as a single figure with a playset. So the traditional deco of the Sorceress will probably get released as a single carded figure. Mattel has a better chance of selling this deco as a single carded figure than they do the white version. So yes, it is very smart of them to have the white version with Castle Grayskull, because now they're set up for success, to use a term that's thrown around a lot in the business world, and sell the traditional Filmation colors, if you will, on a single card release. Again, something we did in Classics, although we did release the original version first and then Temple of Darkness, because honestly we didn't know we were going to even be able to get to that. But with what they're doing with Origins, I think it makes total sense from a, sideline point of view, armchair general, if you will. So 2 different versions, again, much like Tila and Goddess, you have the same tool, 2 decos that are both legitimate. They're not creating wacky decos. So where it all comes together is really who's buying this product. Is it collectors? Is it dads, moms? Is it kids? Looking at the marketing material, the intention is it's mom and dad sharing their love of the vintage line with kids and hoping that that's going to inspire their kids to become fans. The reality is we are already seeing it on clearance, and we have to actually account for that, because as items disappear, so does the planogram, and you can't just sell one item. And also, characters that are fully tooled, how much are we seeing them? That's the other indicator. So Rock-On and Stondar. There is a very large tooling bank that Mattel has. Like I said, the Horde Troopers were a big investment. That's a fully tooled figure. Probably $100,000 to tool, maybe less, but still a high expense to pay once. So it's there. It's in their tooling bank. So likely, again, we'll see that as a single release. I do hope Origins continues. I'm a big fan of it, and let me know what your thoughts are. These are good indicators to try to understand the future of any brand, and I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for watching.